In a quiet little town nestled between cobblestone streets and whispering trees, there lived an old clockmaker named Edwin. His workshop was a world of its own, a dim and dusty sanctuary filled with the endless symphony of ticking clocks. Sunlight, thin and golden, streamed through a single window, illuminating the slow dance of dust motes in the air. Each day Edwin sat hunched over his bench, surrounded by the faces of time grandfathers, cuckoos, and pocket watches, all waiting for his skilled hands.
Ho, ho, ho!
He was a master of his craft, mending broken gears and polishing worn brass until they shone like new. But while he could restart any clock, his own heart had stopped ticking with joy long ago. The steady beat of his tools echoed the loneliness that had settled deep within his soul. The clocks marked the passing of hours, days, and years, each tick a reminder of a life spent measuring time instead of living it. One evening, as the moon cast a silvery glow over the silent town, a strange and wonderful idea took root in Edwin's mind.
Ho, ho, ho!
He pushed aside the clutter of half-repaired clocks and cleared his workbench. He wouldn't be fixing another person's timepiece tonight. Instead, he would build something for himself. He began to work on a clock unlike any he had ever crafted. Its frame was carved from ancient oak, with intricate designs of swirling vines and hidden stars. The gears were delicate, spun from silver and gold, each one cut with painstaking precision. This wasn't just a machine to tell time. It was a vessel for a feeling he had long forgotten. As he worked, the scent of wood shavings and oil filled the air.
Ho, ho, ho!
With every piece he shaped and every screw he tightened, he poured a little of his faded hope into its creation. He worked through the night, driven by a quiet desperation, hoping this special clock could somehow mend the broken parts of his own spirit and make him feel alive again. The final gear, small and shimmering, rested on the tip of his finger. The workshop was silent save for the chorus of ticks from the surrounding clocks. With a trembling hand, Edwin leaned over the ornate frame and gently lowered the last piece into its designated place.
Ho, ho, ho!
The moment it clicked into its housing, a brilliant spark of light erupted from the clock's very center. It wasn't the harsh flash of metal striking metal, but a soft, warm radiance that pulsed like a heartbeat. The light grew, bathing the entire workshop in a magical glow, silencing the cacophony of ticks and tocks. Within the clock's newly fitted glass dome, the light swirled and condensed. Then, with a delicate flutter, a pair of tiny, iridescent wings unfolded. A fairy, no bigger than his thumb, materialized from the brilliance.
Ho, ho, ho!
She shimmered with an inner light, her presence turning the dusty old workshop into a breathtaking chamber of wonder. The tiny fairy floated gracefully from her glass enclosure and hovered in the air before Edwin, her wings beating so fast they were just a blur of light. She smiled, and her smile seemed to cast dancing patterns on the old wooden walls. Edwin stared, his eyes wide with a mixture of shock and utter amazement. He had spent his life working with cold, hard mechanics, with the predictable certainty of gears and pendulums.
Ho, ho, ho!
Magic was something from storybooks, not something that appeared on his workbench. He blinked, wondering if his tired mind was playing tricks on him. But the fairy was real, her gentle glow warming his face. Her voice, when she spoke, was like the chime of a tiny silver bell, clear and melodic. "Thank you for setting me free," she said, her voice filled with a gratitude that seemed ancient and profound. "I have been trapped inside your broken time for many, many years." Edwin could only continue to stare, his heart beginning to beat with a rhythm he hadn't felt in decades.
Ho, ho, ho!
The fairy drifted closer, a mischievous twinkle in her eyes. "You once built clocks for joy, not just for work," she whispered, her voice carrying on the still air. She raised a tiny, glowing wand, no bigger than a needle, and waved it in a gentle arc. In an instant, the dusty, silent workshop was transformed. The shadows retreated, replaced by a warm, golden light. Phantoms of memory began to fill the room. The air, once thick with the smell of oil and old wood, now carried the sweet scent of sawdust and fresh paint.
Ho, ho, ho!
Echoes of children's laughter bounced off the walls, a sound so foreign, yet so deeply familiar. Toys he had carved as a young man spinning tops, wooden soldiers, and miniature windmills appeared on the shelves, their colors vibrant and new. He saw ghostly images of his younger self, his hands covered in paint, his face alight with creation. The fairy's voice was a soft murmur beside him. "Do you remember what it felt like to dream? Before time became a master and not a friend." As Edwin watched, mesmerized, the scene shifted again.
Ho, ho, ho!
A vivid memory, clearer than any other, took shape right before him. He saw a young boy sitting on the floor of this very workshop. It was him. His own small hands, clumsy but determined, were piecing together his very first clock from scraps of wood and leftover parts. His eyes, bright and full of wonder, were fixed on his creation. The clock was simple, almost crude, but to the boy, it was a masterpiece of imagination. Nearby, the faint, shimmering figures of his parents stood watching, their faces filled with love and pride.
Ho, ho, ho!
A warm, gentle melody, like an old forgotten lullaby played on an acoustic guitar, filled the air. The faint ticking of the boy's first clock blended with the steady, hopeful beat of a young heart. Edwin felt a tear trace a path down his weathered cheek. He remembered that boy. He remembered the feeling of sawdust under his fingernails and the pure, unburdened joy of creating something new, not to measure the world, but to add wonder to it. The fairy smiled, seeing the light of memory return to Edwin's eyes.
Ho, ho, ho!
With a flick of her wand, she flew around the workshop, her light trailing behind her like a comet's tail. She tapped the face of each clock hanging on the walls. One by one, they began to change. The stern, monotonous ticking gave way to something new, something alive. The grandfather clock in the corner chimed not with a solemn bong, but with a deep, joyful melody that sounded like a cello. The cuckoo clocks popped open, their little birds singing cheerful, improvised tunes instead of their usual call.
Ho, ho, ho!
The mantel clocks played harmonious chords, their chimes weaving together into a beautiful, whimsical symphony. The gears behind the glass faces no longer just turned. They spun and whirled like tiny, dancing stars, casting brilliant patterns of light across the room. With every tick and every chime, more laughter seemed to return to the workshop, chasing away the last of the lonely shadows. The clocks were no longer just marking the relentless march of hours, they were singing stories. The fairy floated back to Edwin and held out her hand.
Ho, ho, ho!
Resting in her palm was a single, glowing gear, pulsing with the same warm light that she radiated. It hummed with a gentle energy, a quiet power that felt both ancient and brand new. "Time isn't only for counting," she said, her voice soft but full of wisdom. "It's for living. And every second, even the ones that have passed, can still be beautiful." Edwin reached out and took the gear. It felt warm in his palm, like holding a captured sunbeam. He turned to the magical clock he had just completed, the one that had freed her, and carefully placed the glowing gear into its heart.
Ho, ho, ho!
As soon as it settled into place, the clock's hands began to spin, not forward, but backward. They moved faster and faster, and as they did, the face of the clock became a screen showing him flashes of his life, his first love, the day he opened his shop, moments of quiet happiness he had long since forgotten. It was a kaleidoscope of his own past, shown not with regret, but with a gentle, loving grace. As the first rays of the morning sun began to peek through the window, the magical light in the workshop started to soften. The fairy's glow became fainter, more translucent.
Ho, ho, ho!
She smiled at Edwin one last time, a look of serene peace on her face. With a final, silent farewell, she began to fade, dissolving into 1,000 tiny sparks of light. The sparks swirled in the air for a moment before drifting toward the clock on the bench, sinking back into the wood and metal from which she came. A single, brilliant sparkle broke away from the rest and floated gently over to Edwin, settling right over his heart before vanishing within him. The workshop was quiet once more, but it was a different kind of quiet.
Ho, ho, ho!
It was peaceful, not empty. When the morning sun finally filled the room, the fairy was gone. But her magic, her light, and her lesson remained, ticking gently and warmly inside him. From that day on, Edwin's workshop was no longer a place of shadows and solitude. It was filled with a constant, gentle warmth that seemed to radiate from the walls themselves. The door, once always closed, was now propped open, and the sound of joyful chimes and happy chatter spilled out into the cobblestone street. Children and families from all over the town were drawn to the shop, their faces full of awe.
Ho, ho, ho!
Edwin, his eyes now bright with the same spark he'd had as a boy, greeted every visitor with a genuine smile. He no longer just fixed clocks, he created them. And each new clock he built, no matter how small, held a faint, magical sparkle within its gears, a tiny piece of the fairy's light. His clocks did more than just tell time. They were small reminders, gifted to the world, that if you look closely enough, you can find the magic and the joy hidden in every single moment.
Ho, ho, ho!